Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm so happy to be here. Hi, Natalie, Bernal, Anthony, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Peden, and I am a pathologist. I have been working with Kaplan since 2015, and I have mostly been doing USMLE Step 1 pathology instruction, but I am now delighted to have a full-time role with Kaplan, and so this is just such a treat for me to be able to join you teaching. This is something that I tremendously enjoy, and I really hope that you will all enjoy what we're going to talk about today. So I'm a pathologist, like I mentioned. I specialize in blood banking and transfusion medicine, which is a extremely niche corner of pathology where I actually don't have a microscope, but rather I run one of the clinical laboratories, the blood bank. So overseeing, overseeing blood transfusions at the hospital, making sure that they are taking place in a safe and evidence-based fashion. So I worked full-time in academics doing nothing but transfusion medicine for several years. And while I was there, I worked as the associate program director for the pathology residency program for about 4 years. So I went through 4.5 cycles of applications. And so I'm really excited to be here to share my perspectives as a former associate program director with you, and also to bring you some brand new data that was just published within the last couple of weeks, so that you can really feel confident about your strategy for applying to residency. I know you've been really focused on step 1 and all of that, getting that pass on step 1. And obviously that is super, super important. But if we take a step back and think really, what are we doing here? The ultimate goal is for you to match, right? Ideally into the specialty and program of your choosing. So we're going to take a break from some of the preclinical science and, just think about really a little more big picture strategies. So if you have any questions, we have 2 fantastic TAs here with us this morning who I believe you know. We have Dr. Fadi and Dr. Mariam. So please, if you have any questions that I am not answering, please feel free to reach out to them. I will do my best to follow along with questions in the chat, but sometimes I might miss things. And if you have any tech issues, if I start sounding like Darth Vader, which unfortunately is not a hypothetical, that actually happened once, please reach out to our tech TA, Joe, and Joe will be able to help sort things out if it's on your end or if it's on my end, to make sure that we all have an enjoyable and snafu-free morning. So I just wanted to also make a couple of brief announcements. I know that there was an email sent out yesterday regarding some content that's going to be made available to you. So the recordings of Dr. Seiden's anatomy lectures are going to be available to you for the next 2 weeks. And you're also going to be getting a special question-based review session with Dr. White. And I don't have the exact date for that, but it's after your neuroanatomy session with Dr. White. Tomorrow, Saturday, you will also you'll get access to all of the slides that Dr. Pincus had presented. There will be TAs there. The TAs will put up the slides unsynced for you to peruse at your own pace. They're going to give you about 15 minutes per slide deck. And if you have any particular questions about that, please reach out to Dr. Mariam or Dr. Fadi, and they'll be able to help make sure that you are in the right place at the right time so you have all of your resources. So with that, why don't we go ahead and dive into today's session? So by the end of today's session, you will be able to interpret historical match data for applicants with a similar background to you. And we're going to look at this very recently released data from the 2021-2022 application cycle. By the end of today, you will outline a search criteria that can help you identify residency programs that you want to apply to. You will be able to explain characteristics of applicants that program directors view favorably. create an application strategy that will increase your chance of matching. And finally, we'll talk just briefly about the SOAP process. So let's start by discussing data from recent years to help you identify information about applicants who have a similar background to you as you're doing some of your initial research. So before we start, I want to make sure everybody understands we are so happy that you're here. We really need international physicians in the US. Right now, international medical graduates make up about 25% of the physicians who are currently working in the US. So a very significant proportion. And the AAMC predicts that there's going to be a physician shortage in the coming years. And that's going to be about 45,000 primary care physicians and about 46,000 surgeons and specialists over the next decade. Whoops, skipped a slide. Oh, hold on just 1 second. I think, Joe, could we pause the slides for just a moment? I just want to make sure I've got my slides that have the exact most updated data for you. Thanks everybody for your patience. I apologize for this little pause here. Thanks for understanding, Juliana. Well, while we're waiting, why don't you share with me where's everybody joining from today? I know we tend to have students from all over the country and all over the world. Let's see, we have folks from Colombia, from India, from Virginia, West Palm Beach, Florida, fabulous Indianapolis, wonderful Hungary, Sweden. Oh my gosh, this is really a global day. All right, let's see if we can scooch forward into, aha, perfect. Excellent. All right, so let's get right back into it. So in the 2021-2022 application cycle, there was about a 61% match rate for U.S. international medical graduates who matched into PGY1 positions, and about a 58% match rate for non-U.S. IMGs. Now, this percent matched is the percent of active applicants, which means those who submitted a rank list. This does not include those who did not have a rank list and those who withdrew. Those folks are going to be included in some of the SOAP data, but for this particular number, this is 61.4% and 58.1% of the active applicants. You can see this is a pretty steady percentage that has matched over the last 5 years or so. So what are some of the most popular specialties that international physicians have matched into? Well, for US IMGs, the most popular specialties were internal medicine, family medicine, pediatrics, psychiatry, and emergency medicine, which pretty much mirrors the popular specialties across the match in general. And for the non-US international physicians, internal medicine, family, pediatrics, pathology, what? It's pretty great if you haven't considered it, and neurology were the 5 most popular specialties. So I would encourage all of you to just Google Charting Match Outcomes 2022. This is published every other year, and this is hot off the presses, like this month, hot off the presses. And this document is really helpful for you to look at so much data from the NRMP match. Now, I saw there was a question earlier about the San Francisco match. We will just mention very briefly a couple of the other matches, but because the vast majority of applicants are using the NRMP match, we're really going to be focusing on looking at data from that particular match program. So even though we had a 58.1 and a 61.4% match rate across the board, the particular specialty that you apply to may well have a different match rate for applicants like yourself. So you can see, for example, in pathology, for non-US IMGs, there was a 59% match rate, and for US IMGs, there was a 45% match rate. Let me see if I can get my pointer. But if you look at something over here like dermatology, for example, right, this is a more competitive specialty for any applicant. So, you know, a 32% and a 37% match rate, for example. So I would really encourage you to go into this document and look up the specialty or specialties that you're considering applying to so that you can get a really detailed understanding of what the match process, what kind of expectations you might be looking at for your particular specialty or specialties. So there are a few really interesting pieces of data that I saw when I was looking through this. So the first is that there are several things in your control, and because we're talking about this so early in your journey, you really have a big opportunity here to impact your ultimate outcome in the match. So first of all, the mean number of contiguous ranks, which means if you apply to two specialties, let's say you apply to pathology and internal medicine, and your top 5 programs are pathology programs, and then number 6 and 7 are internal medicine. Your contiguous ranks would be those 5 pathology programs. So that's what this contiguous ranks means. US IMGs who matched had an average number of 8 contiguous ranks, whereas unmatched applicants had only 2.5 programs on their rank list. And for the non-US IMGs, it was the same trend. Matched applicants had a longer rank list than did unmatched applicants. So one of the things that I really want you to take away from today is that the more programs that are on your rank list, the higher likelihood you are to match. So another thing to look at is that the average USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 scores are significantly higher for matched applicants, both from the US IMG category as well as the non-US IMG category. So what all of you are doing right now, you are preparing so hard for Step 1. I know that you're not going to get a score, and we're going to talk about some of the changes, some of the impact of the pass-fail Step 1. But just understand that your scores on the USMLE exams, that is in your control. And both of those things have a huge, huge impact on whether or not you ultimately are able to match. Again, this data is available for every specialty. This table that I'm just showing you right here, this is the average information, but you can go into this document and look at pathology or internal medicine or whatever it is. Oh, thank you, Joe, brought to my attention ranking. So when you submit, you're going to apply to residency programs, and then you will be offered interviews from some of the programs that you've applied to, hopefully a lot. And after you have been invited, then you will go on the interview. After the interview, at the end of kind of the season, so like late January to February, you will submit what's called a rank list. And this is all of the programs that you interviewed in that you would consider attending. So let's say you did 7 interviews. I would strongly, strongly urge you to rank all 7 of them. And ranking means in order of preference. So if you want to go to program A, that's your favorite, you're going to put that at the top of the list. And then you're going to kind of go down the line in terms of your particular preference of if you had, if you were in control of everything, where would you ideally end up, right? We'll talk a little bit more about strategies for the actual rank list a little bit later. Yes, so you would only put a program on your rank list if you have actually interviewed at that program. And the reason is that if you haven't interviewed there, that program is not going to have you on their rank list, right? So the applicants all have a list of their preferred programs. And at the same time, the programs have a preference order of folks that they have interviewed. And the match algorithm, which is actually like a Nobel Prize winning economic algorithm, goes through and matches up applicants with programs based on both of those preference lists or rank lists. You are very welcome. All right. So as I mentioned before, there are a couple of non-NRMP match programs. So for ophthalmology, there's the San Francisco match. And for urology, there's the urology residency match program. There's also a military match, but this is only open to graduates of LCME accredited medical schools. But again, we're going to talk about some broad generalities here, even if the data that we're going to show is from the NRMP. Most of what we talk about today should still be very, very relevant for the folks applying to ophthalmology and urology programs. Okay, so there's a lot of information that you can find on the internet about all the different programs, all the different specialties. And I'm going to talk about two in particular today, but these are not the only ways that you can research residency programs. These are just two that I find to be particularly helpful because they have a lot of data. So what we're going to do is look at how you can manipulate this data to find out, what are the outcomes for people like me? What have people like, my application done in recent years for specific programs? So the first tool that we're going to talk about is the FREIDA website, which you have probably heard about. This is from the AMA, the American Medical Association, and it contains extensive details about all of the programs that you can apply to. The Residency Explorer tool, this is a separate tool from the AAMC, and this helps you compare yourself to matched candidates from specific programs. So the first place that I would recommend that you look at is the FREIDA website. So let's just talk about how you can make the most of the FREIDA website to get the most relevant data for yourself. So you are going to pull up the FREIDA website and log in with your AMA account. And then you're going to type in the specialty that you are interested in researching. So here we have chosen that we're going to research internal medicine, but you can go through and choose whichever specialty you are interested in. So there are many different search parameters that you can use to kind of narrow down your search. There's, the total number of positions in the program, the percent US physicians. One that I wanted to highlight is the percent IMG. And what I would recommend is putting this number at something above 0, right? Because we know, unfortunately, there are some programs out there that just never accept international physicians into their programs. And so if you leave this range at 0 to 100, you're probably going to be pulling up programs that are just not going to be a great use of your money, energy, time, resources. So I would change this percentage to like 1%, 4%, like I did here, something above 0, so that you're looking at programs that do in fact accept international physicians. So once you have selected a program to look at, I've pulled up UPMC Medical Education McKeesport. You'll be able to find just some general information that that particular program has provided. You can find information such as, total number of residents. You can find average work hours that this program has reported. Something that I wanted to share is that if the program has included this information, you should be able to see the date range when this program is expecting to offer their interviews, not to send out the invitations, but when the actual interviews are being conducted. So this could kind of give you a general sense of what your application season, what your interview season might look like. Another thing that you can see is the actual, this is going to be the second purple arrow, the number of interviews conducted last year for first year positions. So maybe this program has 15 PGY1 positions that they are accepting. And last year they interviewed 147 people. So that can just kind of give you a better sense of the scale of who is going to be getting interviews, not necessarily the data about, oh, well, applicants to this particular program had this step 1 or step 2 score, but just to give you a big picture sense of what that program is going to be doing during this interview cycle. So once you've gotten kind of a general sense of the programs that you think you might be targeting based on your Frida search, you can go into the Residency Explorer to get kind of a reasonable sense of how your application is going to compare to previously matched applicants in specific programs. So this is a great tool. It is free. You do need to have an AAMC account. So if you don't have one of those already, I would recommend that you get one. And this allows you to explore programs in 23 specialties. So what are some ways that you can use this tool to make the most of it so that you understand specifics for you specifically as an applicant, right? So first, you're going to select a specialty that you're interested in applying to. So here we've chosen internal medicine categorical, which means all 3 years of internal medicine training. And then you're going to come to this page. Under the profile, you are going to put in several details about yourself. You can include your step 1 and step 2 scores, whether you are a US or non-US IMG, what category of applicant are you? You can include number of publications, number of research experiences, right? Number of volunteer activities. So you can put in quite a lot of detail about yourself that will then be used in the next couple of pages in the search. That's very, very specific to you. So Monique, that's a great question. What is the difference between categorical and preliminary? Categorical means you are matching into the entire length of that program. So internal medicine is a 3-year residency program. Categorical means you are matched for all 3 of those years. A preliminary year is just a PGY1 position, and these are typically paired with specialties that don't start until PGY2. So for example, radiology, dermatology, right? Those are some specialties where you would need to apply both to the radiology programs as well as preliminary years. This might be what some folks who trained a long time ago would call your intern year. So think about the preliminary year as the intern year. And if you are applying to a categorical program, you don't need to also apply to a preliminary year. You only need that prelim year if you're applying to an advanced specialty like derm or radiology. So for optho, do some programs need a preliminary year? I would encourage you, I don't have the explicit details about optho right now. I will absolutely look that up during our break, and I will bring you that information at the top of the next hour to make sure that we're hitting all of the needs for the different types of matches. So let me just take a quick note on that. And I will let you know around 10:30 Eastern time. Okay, so you are in the Residency Explorer tool. You've put in all of your particular profile details, and then you will be able to search through programs, much like you did on the Frida website. But here you can look by state. You could look by region. There are sometimes folks who want to be in a certain region in the country, but they're not necessarily tied to one specific state. You can also search by visa type that is accepted or sponsored by the program. Some folks know ahead of time which type of visa they're going to be seeking. So this can be a really helpful way to only look at programs that you know you're going to be eligible for. So on this main search page, you will be shown the percent of matched applicants who match your category, so USIMG, non-USIMG, DO, whatever, and where your scores, your publications compare to recently matched applicants in that program. So this will kind of tell you if you are in the middle 50%, upper 50%, bottom 25%, or if you're just way above or below what those matched applicants had for that particular parameter. So here, right, we've got the step 1 scores, step 2 scores, publications, research, volunteer work, and there's a guide that you will see that explains what each of these little bubbles means. So for small programs or for recently accredited programs, there may not be data available. So this search tool is very powerful, but it's not going to be 100% all encompassing. So just keep that in mind as you're starting to use this. So Juliana, gastroenterology is a fellowship. That is a subspecialty fellowship. You would need to complete first a 3-year residency in internal medicine. And after that, you would complete the gastroenterology fellowship. So you cannot apply as a PGY1 into gastroenterology. So once you've identified some programs that you might be interested in, you can look at just one program at a time in very granular detail. And so you can compare your application to applicants who matched in that program. And you can see here, for example, an applicant with a 231 on step 1 would be roughly in the middle 50% of applicants who matched in this particular program. For step 2, you can also identify whether you are kind of in the range for applicants who matched in this specific program, Mainline Health System, Lincoln Medical Center. Another thing that's great about the Residency Explorer tool is that you can compare different programs. You can compare based on the characteristics that you choose, and you can actually download this as an Excel file. So maybe this is something that you want to just collect a whole bunch of data, but you don't want to look at it all at once. You can download the data, save it for later, look at it whenever you have some time. And again, this data is only going to be as good as what has been entered into the system. So it may not have 100% of data for every single program, but it's a really, really good place to start that will get you a lot of robust data that will help you get a sense of your competitiveness in a particular specialty or for particular programs or regions of the country. So why don't we pause here because we're going to shift gears. Are there any questions that you have that I have not answered yet related to the material we've talked about so far? See, there's a couple of folks typing right now. What is an AMA account? So AMA is the American Medical Association, and they have a website that you can create an account so that you can then log in and use that Frida search. So if a person applies to a residency program while they are a green card holder, are they considered a USIMG? So whether you are considered a USIMG would be based on whether you are, I think it would depend on what your status was when you graduated. I don't have the specifics of that particular question, but I can try to find that out. So let me take a note of that, and I will look that up during our break as well. So costs of Frida and AMA accounts, both of those are going to be free for you to use. Do you need to apply to 2 programs if you opt for this kind of specialty? So if you're applying to a program that matches into an advanced year, such as radiology or dermatology, yes, you need to apply to preliminary and advanced programs. So the couples match, I did not include any information about the couples match for today, just because it's not something that most folks are going through. But Stephanie, if you want to ask any specific questions to one of the TAs, then we can try to make sure that we either point you in the right direction or get you an answer, hopefully. Any updates on step 1 becoming pass-fail? Yes, we are going to talk about that in detail. LPR. I don't know what LPR is. Do either of the TAs know what LPR is? In the meantime, what about step 1 pass-fail instead of a score? Yes, we're going to talk about that in detail. Is there a limit to the number of programs you can apply to? There is not a limit. The only limit is going to be the amount of money in your checkbook. And we'll talk about how to figure out how many programs to apply to a little bit later this morning. So if an individual has already finished the preliminary year, do they automatically pass to the advanced program? Not necessarily. So if you are, sometimes a person might apply to both a preliminary and an advanced program, so a preliminary year as well as radiology. It's possible to match into only one or the other. It's possible that you could match into a prelim year, but not into an advanced year. And that would be a situation where you would need to go through the SOAP process, which again, we'll talk about a little bit later this morning. All right, so we are going to talk about step 3, hang tight. We're going to talk about research. Okay, excellent. You're all starting to anticipate some of the next content. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the next section of our presentation. So this is probably the section I'm most excited about, just because selfishly, I was a program director, and I feel like I have a lot of knowledge to impart on all of you about this topic. And so I'm very, very excited. We're going to spend the next about 20 minutes. We'll see how far we get, and then we'll take our first break. So over the last 10 years or so, the number of applications submitted to residency programs has risen steadily. This is no secret. And if anybody wants to read a very interesting paper about some thoughts on why this is occurring, I wanted to share this reference with all of you. So over the last 10 years, you can see, this trend started well before the pandemic, with the number of applications essentially doubling between 2007 and 2021. So for international graduates back in 2007, there were approximately 80 applications submitted per applicant. And in 2021, that number was 139. So some of this might be exacerbated by virtual interviews, which really are, I think, wonderful because they have a lower barrier to allowing applicants to attend a greater number of interviews. But some people think that this can lead to what might be referred to as interview hoarding. Let's say someone applies to 50 programs and they get 40 interview invitations. Well, that's probably too many interviews, right? But that person might hold on to them until it's too late for that interview to be released to someone else who actually could use more interviews. So there's a lot of different reasons why the number of applications have gone up so much. But that being said, this is the reality, and you need to be prepared to submit the strongest possible application in the setting of lots and lots of applications being submitted. So programs on average receive about 10 times more applications than do they rank. So if a program, for example, ranks about 100 applicants, you can expect that they received 1,000 interviews, right? So for every 10 applications they receive, they only rank one of those applicants. Now, this data comes from the NRMP Program Director Survey Report. This information was published in 2021. There should be updated data coming out soon, but I don't expect that this is going to change significantly from the most recent interview application cycle. So how do the program directors go from 10 times as many applicants that they rank? Well, unfortunately, almost half of applications are rejected based on a standard screening. So you can see here that the blue bar is rejections based on standard screening, and then slightly over 50% are receiving a more holistic review, right? So this is the average across all specialties. And if you go into this program director survey report, you can see specific details about your particular specialty of interest. So knowing that so many of these applications are rejected just based on standard screening, well, what does that standard screening actually look like? What are the parameters that program directors are using when doing this initial standardized screen? So the top 3 metrics are USMLE Step 1 score, the MSPE, which is in the US, the Medical Student Performance Evaluation, and then finally the Step 2 CK score. Those are the top 3 most important factors of this initial standardized screening when it comes to education and academic performance factors. I also just wanted to draw your attention to the 5th item on this list, which is still pretty high. Any failed attempt at any of the USMLE exams is a very significant red flag on your application. So I know that this does not specifically include data from pass-fail step 1, right? We're all in the very early phases of adapting to that change. But how I would interpret this as a former program director is that you need to do everything you can to pass step 1 the first time you take it, right? You're not going to have a number, but if you fail step 1 and then ultimately go on to pass it, that is still a red flag for the programs. So when it comes to the personal characteristics or just other knowledge about applicants, there are some factors that program directors would use in that initial screening. So the top ranking spots here are letters of recommendation in that specialty. We'll talk a little bit more about letters of recommendation a little bit later. And your overall personal statement, right? So your personal statement, this is something that you should be very thoughtful about crafting. You should have a lot of people look at your personal statement. You should get input. You should get thoughts. You should get suggestions. You should have other people help you proofread it because that is one of the most important pieces of your application that program directors are looking at when they're deciding whom to interview. So once the interviews have been completed, how do program directors decide who to rank? So again, from an education and academic performance perspective, the top 3 most important factors are USMLE Step 1, the MSPE, and USMLE Step 2, right? And I would anticipate, again, knowing how much of a red flag any failed attempt at USMLE exams are, for this year and onward, my interpretation of this data is that a pass on step 1 on the first time is going to be a significantly important factor when program directors are deciding who to rank. So MSPE, that stands for Medical Student Performance Evaluation. It's a kind of standardized letter that US medical schools send out to programs. It's not exactly the GPA, it's kind of like a summary of that individual's experience in medical school. Okay, so when it comes to deciding who to rank, there are 4 factors that are at the top of the list that are super important when it comes to personal characteristics, right? The most important one is interpersonal skills, right? Very closely related to this are how you interact with faculty during your interview or during your visit, feedback from current residents who you might have interacted with, and then finally, just general interactions with the house staff or the residents on the day of your interview. Anybody that you meet who is part of a particular program, if you meet a first-year resident, if you meet a chief, if you meet a secretary, if you meet the program coordinator, if you meet a housekeeper, anybody that you meet, you should assume whatever that person has to say about you could potentially impact your ultimate fate on whether you end up on that rank list. You treat everybody with kindness. You treat everybody with respect. You are humble and thankful for being invited to interview. Right? A strong application on paper is just not enough. You have to be really prepared and polished during those interviews. That's going to be really helpful to help get you on that rank list. So let's talk, and this will be the last topic that we talk about before we take a break. So just some new perspective in the context of the pass-fail step one, right? So although we were just looking at the most recently published program director survey, there has been admittedly a lot that has changed since then, right? So first, this step one pass-fail change, this is going to have significant implications on how program directors are able to perform their initial screening. As we saw before, a step one score was the most important thing that program directors previously considered when deciding who to interview and who to rank. So there was a paper published in the New England Journal about 2 years ago that surveyed program directors' perspectives on the application process now that step one is going to be pass-fail. Now, this data is hypothetical because they collected it 2 years ago before the change went into place. But there are two specific results that I wanted to draw your attention to. First is that close to 81% of program directors say that they are going to increase the emphasis on step two scores when selecting applicants to interview for their program, right? That should not be a surprise. We already saw that step two scores were extremely important for the interview selection and ranking process. Now they're going to be even more so important, right? So right now, I know you've got the nose to the grind for step one. I would encourage you, as soon as you've passed your step one exam, get right into step two, dedicate as much of your energy and your effort as you can to getting not only a pass on the first time, but as high a score on step two as possible. The next piece of data that I wanted to draw your attention to is that almost half of program directors believed that international medical graduates are going to be put at a disadvantage due to this change to pass-fail step one. So this means that it's even more important than ever that you put together the overall strongest possible application package. Part of that is the USMLE exams, but that by itself is not enough, right? So we've looked at some of those factors. We'll talk a little bit more about putting together a really strong application package for the rest of the day this morning. So step three, I saw someone asked about taking step three earlier. So one way that you can strengthen your application is by taking and passing and ideally scoring really highly on step three. Program directors are going to look favorably on applicants who have already passed step three. Program directors see a low step one or step two score or any failure as a major red flag because they would worry that the applicant might fail step three and not be eligible for full licensure, or that they might eventually fail their board exam. And pass rate for board examinations is something that every residency program is evaluated on nationally. And so it's in program directors' best interests to get candidates into their program who will pass their board exam on the first try, right? So doing well on step three is going to help reassure program directors that you're already eligible for full licensure once you become a second-year resident. Another thing to just make sure you're aware of is that taking step three is necessary for obtaining an H-1B visa. We're not going to go into details about the requirements for all visas, but you should strongly consider taking step three before you submit your residency applications. So I'm going to pause and let me see if there are other questions that we have not answered yet before we take our break. So will there be a chance of step two CS coming back? So right now that is not on the table. Step two CS is still indefinitely paused. I will not say that it has been forever canceled because I can't say that for sure. But right now, if you are preparing to apply, say in the fall of 2023, you're not going to be asked to take step two CS. Will step three allow you to get an H1 instead of a J1? So step three is required for an H1B visa. So working experience for a year or so on your resume, will that help you get matched? Well, Monica, that depends on the kind of work that you've been doing And we'll talk after the break about how you can describe some of your experiences in a way that's going to be the most positive spin and the most favorable for program directors. So when can you take step 3? You have to have taken and passed step 1 and step 2. So what happens if you take step 3 after submitting applications? Well, you can always send an update to programs that you've applied to, especially if it's a program that you hadn't yet been invited to interview, sharing with them, hi, I wanted to share the great news that I have now passed step 3. Look at my amazing score. I scored a 274, right? And, I'm still very interested in your program. I hope that you will, consider giving my application another look, and, I can attend an interview. Anything like that would all be very helpful. So the OET, when should you take it? The OET, I don't have a specific timing for when you should take it. I think you can kind of look at your overall study plan for USMLE. I would say, focus on getting first time pass and high scores on step 2 and step 3, and then work in the OET exam around that. So if you have failed step 1, Rabia, if you have failed step 1, does that make step 3 a must for you? I would strongly encourage you to take step 3 and to really study as hard as you can for it to try to get the highest score possible. Like I said, any failure on any of the USMLE exams is seen as a red flag. So knowing that, you're probably going to need to do a little bit more than some other applicants are to make a stronger overall presentation for your application. So is there better to pay for a rotation through the AMA due to lack of face-to-face during interviews? So we'll talk a little bit about clinical rotations after the break. As far as lack of face-to-face rotations during interviews, there is one other recent development that can help signal to a program, that's just your only clue about your particular strong interest in them, that you might otherwise get during a face-to-face rotation. We'll talk about that after the break. So Alvaro, can you reach out to the programs and let them know after you received a score? Yes, if you have already submitted your application and then you get another score result, that score result will be transmitted through ERAS, but it couldn't hurt to also reach out to the program coordinator or the program director and share that information with them directly through an email. So if your step 1 and step 2 results are low and you don't get an interview, can you take step 1 again? So unfortunately, Rishab and Mayor, that is one of the really difficult parts of the USMLE exams, is that if you pass the exam, you don't get to take it again. The only time you get to repeat an exam is if you've actually failed. So once you pass, your score is just your score. You can't go back in time and change it. And you just have to work on crafting the other pieces of your application to make yourself as strong an applicant as possible. So Maria and Alejandra, how will you describe the studying steps? Step 1 OET. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. There is going to be, I believe, one more session that you're having similar to this about applying to residency applications, about applying to residency programs. But we're not specifically today talking about study schedules. So how do publications and research affect matching? Sai and Kieran, we're going to talk about that after the break. Is the MSPE only for US IMGs? I believe it is only for US IMGs. There is a letter, I think it depends on the country. There are some medical schools that do send kind of a summary letter that comes along with the international physician's application, but it's not uniform. And so the MSPE is really just like a descriptor for the US programs. If your medical school does provide a summary letter that describes your experience, it might say what your class rank was. It might highlight some particular, contributions that you made through community service or through tutoring, something like that, to kind of the medical school environment. But if that's just not something that your medical school writes, if that's not something that is standard in your country, then I don't believe that is required for you to submit it as an IMG. So the gap between interviewing before applying to residency. Not sure, Maria and Alejandra, what I understand what that question is. So let me try to answer just one more question before we go to break. So Mandy, that's a great question. Non-US IMGs are folks who have graduated from medical school outside the US and they are not US citizens, right? So a US IMG would be a US citizen who graduated from a medical school outside of the United States. So that's the difference. All right, well, let's pause here because I want to make sure everybody has a chance to stretch your legs, get a little water, get a little coffee. Joe, if you could please put up the 10-minute timer, then I will see everybody at 1:30. See you in a bit. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice break. I had a nice little protein bar and finished my coffee. I hope you did the same. Everybody, we're going to go into the weekend. Super high note. It's going to be a great weekend. You're all going to get a little bit of relaxation, right? Because when you're studying, it's so tempting to just want to put all of your time and all of your effort into study, right? But you are going to do a better job studying if you take some breaks, right? Plan breaks into your schedule. Go for a walk, hang out with a friend, with a family member. Just sit outside and not look at a computer, right? I feel like we all live in the internet now. I say that a lot. Like, I live in the internet because I work remotely and, do basically everything on a computer. So sometimes I just need to shut everything off and go sit on my front porch, breathe in some non-air conditioned air, right? So I would encourage all of you to do the same this weekend. So I know there was one question that I, was looking up the answer to, and that was whether ophthalmology programs require a preliminary year. Again, I am not an expert in the San Francisco match, but from what I can tell, it appears that ophthalmology programs are now required to either be integrated with that first year experience or to have an affiliation with a program. So if you are in the position where you're applying to ophthalmology, I would encourage you to go to the San Francisco Match website. But from what I can tell, I believe it is included all in one program now. Okay, so we've talked about some historical data. Now we're going to talk about what has changed, right? Because a lot has changed. So one of the biggest changes that was put into place as a pilot last year was the ERAS supplemental application. So this was piloted on a smaller scale last year, but starting this year, it will be implemented much more broadly for the first time with 16 participating specialties that you can see listed on this slide. So not everybody, not my specialty yet. I anticipate that will be coming in the next couple of years. The supplemental application is optional, but it is highly, highly recommended that you submit a supplemental application for the reasons that we're going to talk about in the next few slides. So last year, it was only dermatology, internal medicine, and general surgery, as well as, what's the other one? ENT. But this year, most applicants and most programs are probably going to participate if you are applying to one of these specialties. So the ERAS supplemental application opens soon on August 1st, and it closes September 16th. So please pay very careful attention to the deadlines in the year that you are choosing to apply. The programs don't start reviewing the supplemental applications until a little bit later, though, right? So there's a little bit of a window there, and you want to make sure that your supplemental application is submitted on time. So what is included in the supplemental application? Well, there are 3 sections that allow you to share some more holistic information about yourself with the programs you're applying to. So the first piece of the supplemental application is pretty self-explanatory: geographic preference. You can indicate up to 3 U.S. Census regions. You can indicate urban versus rural, and you have the strength of that preference. So for example, if you have a very strong preference to be in an urban setting in the mid-Atlantic Northeast part of the country, you can indicate that. If you have a very strong preference not to be on the West Coast, you can also indicate that. And in the supplemental application, you'll have the opportunity to write a little summary of an explanation of those particular preferences. So I would encourage you to be thoughtful, to include at least some preference information and write just a little blurb for the programs to take a look at. And we'll talk about how programs use that information in just a couple more slides. So a big piece, probably the biggest piece of writing that you will do for the supplemental application is the past experiences section. And here you can include up to 5 experiences that you describe in a little bit more detail than what you have in your ERAS application. This could include work, researching, or volunteering. This can be experiences that you had during or after medical school. You can also include experiences from before medical school. So we'll talk a little more detail on the next slide about describing your past experiences in a way that will be most helpful. And finally, program signaling, which is, I think, super exciting and a wonderful tool that gives applicants a lot more power than what they've had in the past. So let's start by talking a little bit more detail about your past experiences. So how can you describe these experiences? Well, I want you to think overall about painting a picture, writing a story, whichever one speaks more to you, about what makes you unique, what makes you qualified and well suited for a career in the specialty that you're applying to. And I want you to think not only what it is that makes you unique, but why was that particular experience meaningful? How did this impact you or your journey to becoming a practicing physician? Those are the types of details that the program directors are going to respond well to. Don't just say that, I volunteered in a children's hospital. Go on. Why was volunteering in the children's hospital a meaningful experience, right? What happened to you specifically during that time that made it so meaningful, right? You're describing all of these experiences together as a set and not necessarily individually. I would encourage you to think however many you choose to include, if it's all 5, right? Think about them together, building this picture of you. These experiences should really complement your ERAS application, but they shouldn't be an exact repeat of other parts of your application. Just a technical piece is that you are instructed not to use bullet points very specifically. These answers should be written only using US English characters. Just another technical recommendation would be to consider taking a screenshot or printing your supplemental application before you submit it so that you have a record of exactly what it is that you wrote. And this will be helpful for you to review right before an interview. When I am interviewing individuals, I tend to look through their answers to certain questions. Now, we did not have this exact supplemental application when I was a program director, but this is going to be what I see as like the most distilled opportunity for you to show who you are beyond just the numbers on the page to the programs that you are most interested in. Okay, program signals. So program signals are new. They were part of this supplemental application pilot last year, and they are a very powerful tool that can help you secure more interviews. So remember, programs receive about 10 times the number of applications than people do they rank, right? So these are really meant to help programs with the interview selection process. Each specialty that's participating has a maximum number of signals that each applicant can send. The vast majority of these are single digits, like 2, 3, 4, 5 signals, right? So you can pick 5 programs that you want to send a signal to. The only major outlier here is orthopedic surgery, where I believe you can send like 30 signals, which is a lot. But you should plan that you're going to have roughly 5 signals that you're able to send. So 5 programs that you can kind of wave this giant flag and say, hi, look at me. I am really, really, really interested in your program. Yes, your program. I want you. You should want me too. That's basically what a program signal is telling you. There are some really helpful guidelines by specialty that you can find in this AAMC document called Supplemental ERAS Application Guide. For some specialties, you do not need to send a signal to a program if you have done a rotation there, right? So that's kind of like a freebie. If you do a rotation in a particular hospital and your specialty says that counts, don't waste a signal on that program, right? That's basically like a little bonus. Another thing that you might be interested to know is that programs cannot see which other programs you have signaled. All they can tell is that you signaled their program, and that's it. They don't know how many you sent out in total. They don't know if you sent one to their competitor 2 miles down the road, right? It's just whether you signaled them specifically. So this might be the most important slide. I'm going to say this slowly. This might be the most important slide from today's presentation. In the pilot year, 2021 to 2022, more than half of programs shared that geographic preference, program signals, or both help them identify applicants who they would have otherwise overlooked, right? They are finding people who would not have otherwise been interviewed. And because of their responses to the geographic preferences and them sending a program signal, they have now offered an interview to an applicant who would not otherwise have been interviewed. These are very, very powerful tools that are going to help you if you use them in a targeted, thoughtful way. So just a little bit of data to share with you from an ENT pilot from the 2020 to 2021 application cycle. You can see that applicants overall had less than 20% interview rate. So if they applied to 100 programs, they would only be offered interviews at 18 of them. When an applicant sent a signal to a program, 58% of the time they got an interview in that program, right? That's huge. That's huge. That's almost 3 times the rate of interviewing. So this other piece of information at the bottom of this slide, comparative non-signal. So applicants were asked, if you could have sent a signal to one more program, where would that have been? And did you get an interview at that program, right? So like your next top choice. There was just a slightly higher than average rate of interviews, right? So you are getting a significant boost in your chance of getting an interview by sending a signal to a particular program. Now, there is new data from the ENT experience from the last 2 years, but this is still pending peer review. I took a look at it because I was curious. It shows the exact same trend, and the effect seems to be strongest for applicants in the 3rd and 4th quartile. So applicants who otherwise don't have as strong an application, the impact of signaling on their likelihood to get an interview is even higher. So just to reiterate from the program's perspective, how did signaling affect interview offers? Well, on average, applicants who sent a signal, and this is through the supplemental application, who sent a program signal had a higher likelihood of interview. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get an interview, but significantly higher. So how are the programs using these signals? Well, up to 96% are using these as part of that holistic review when deciding who to interview. About 90% use the signals as kind of a tiebreaker when deciding who to interview. So if you have 2 applicants on paper who look very similar, one sent a program signal, the other didn't, they're probably going to interview the person who sent the signal over the nearly identical applicant who did not send a signal. And then about half of programs used the preliminary, tripping over my words. Half of programs use the supplemental application to help prepare for interviews or questions that might be asked. So the deadline for this again this year, I know this is not necessarily relevant for all of you today. This year is September 16th. Make sure you know what the deadline is for the supplemental application the year that you're applying. You do not want to miss this deadline. You do not want to miss your opportunity to use this very powerful tool to get more interviews. So let's just pause here because there may be a lot of questions. So how do you send a signal? What is a signal? This is something that you will include in your supplemental application, and you will pick however many programs your specialty allows, and you can say, I want to signal this program. These are my top 5 choices out of the 100 applications that I'm sending. These 5 programs are my absolute top priority that I would really, really love to get an interview at, right? That's what a signal is. You do not need to send a letter or contact the program director. Wallace, this is all done through the supplemental application. So it makes sense to send a signal. Maria, you can only send the maximum number of signals, right? So if you submit 100 applications, but your specialty says that you can only signal 5 programs, well, all you got is 5. This is another piece of data that, because of the huge number of applicants, that can really help the programs figure out who might be a better fit for them. So how many interviews does a program director do for a program? Moksha, that's a great question. And that's information that you can find in the Charting the Match Outcomes or the program director survey that was referenced earlier in the slides. Is the deadline September 16th, Volha, for next year? The deadline for next year has not yet been released to my knowledge, but definitely keep an eye out for it. And that's something that you should absolutely be aware of. So do you only get a maximum, Lena, of 5 signals per program? The exact number of maximum signals you can send differs by specialty. And you can find that information in the, AAMC Supplemental ERAS Application Guide. I would encourage all of you to look in there if you are applying to one of the specialties that uses supplemental applications so that you can see what the number of signals you are permitted to send is. If you're permitted to send 5, I would send 5. If you're permitted to send 3, I would send all 3. I would use as many signals as you're allowed to for your particular specialty. Wallace, that is a great, it's the social media equivalent of a thumbs up like. I really like that. So what factors should go into who you send a signal to? Well, we talked a lot in the first part of this presentation about researching programs that might be a good fit for you. I would encourage you to start there, right, with Frida and with the Residency Explorer tool. You can also look at programs' websites. You can look at their social media pages. That can also give you a more squishy sense of kind of what the personality of that program is. But I would use the Residency Explorer and Frida as a place to start figuring out where you might want to preferentially send those signals. If you're applying to multiple specialties, do you get the maximum number for each specialty? I believe you do. So if you're applying to general surgery and OBGYN, then you could signal however many surgery programs and however many OBGYN programs. And then does it come down to who you know and being known? That's part of it, but who you know, that wasn't really in that top tier factors when we looked at what program directors are looking at when it comes to selecting interviewees, right? So Maria, sending one of those signals is a way of making yourself known to the program as a person who is much more interested than just the average applicant. All right, so let's move on to another new development, the ALTIS assessments. Note that this is not all specialties that are participating in the ALTIS assessment, only some. Anesthesiology, general surgery, internal medicine, and OBGYN. This is optional for them this year. Ophthalmology, all programs are using the ALTIS assessment. Only programs who choose to participate are going to receive your results. So if you are applying to one of these specialties in the year that you are applying, sign up to take the test as soon as possible. This year it is free. I know that most of you are probably not applying this year. I don't know how long it will be free for, what the fee might be in the future, but at least for now, this assessment is free. So there are 3 parts of the ALTIS assessment that are all meant to kind of get a more global sense of your personality, your thought process, your decision-making strategies. So the first part is called CASPER. CASPER is an open-ended situational judgment test where you will be asked what you would do in a difficult situation and why you would do whatever it is. And this helps kind of determine your behavioral tendencies. Your responses will be scored by people who have been trained to rate these assessments. So the second part of ALTIS is called Snapshot, and this is a one-way interview where you will be asked 3 interview-style questions, and you'll be given 2 minutes to record your response to each question. And then finally, Duet. This is called a value alignment assessment, and it basically helps align what you value with what the particular programs offer, right? And overall, the ALTIS assessment can kind of help you demonstrate your people skills and some of your unique qualities as a physician that are not easily captured with the numbers that you're going to see in your application. So if you're applying to one of these specialties, I would strongly encourage you to consider completing the ALTIS assessment. It's not necessary, but I would encourage you strongly to consider participating. What exactly is free here? So taking the assessment is free. So, when you sign up for USMLE exams, you have to pay a fee to take that exam. The ALTIS assessment, you do not have to pay this year a fee to take that test. It may change. It will likely change in the future. I don't know when it will change, and I don't know how much it will cost to take the assessment in the future. But at least if you take it this year, then it is free. And it's not a pass-fail exam, Chaoyoung. It's more of a global assessment. You're not going to get your results. This is really just information that gets passed along to the programs who are in these 5 specialties. And the ALTIS assessment site, you can find information. I would just put ALTIS assessment into your search engine, into Google or whatever. I don't have the specific website right now. Yeah, and there's no medical knowledge. This is really like a behavioral, the interview style questions and the judgment tests are likely to be medically related, but it's not going to test your knowledge specifically. Yeah, so Maria, think about this as kind of like a job interview, like typical job interview type question. And Varun, I would take the ALTIS assessment. I would take it after you've completed your USMLE exams, but I would take it well in advance of, so I wouldn't take it like September of the year that you're applying. I would take it like no later than August or even July of the year that you're applying. Okay, another new development is that some programs have started to offer standardized interview offer dates. And these programs are dermatology, general surgery, OB, optho, and urology. Most of the programs in these specialties have agreed not to offer interviews before a specific date, right? So this is really helpful to standardize expectations between applicants and programs. In years past, there is often like a race for programs to review applications as soon as possible so that you can send out your interview invitations as soon as possible. And then all of the applicants are just glued to their phone all day, refreshing the email, waiting for someone, please send me an interview, right? So having a standardized interview offer date, if you know that no general surgery programs will be sending out interviews before October 20th or whatever that date is, you can relax, right? Until October 20th, you're not expecting to see anything come to your inbox inviting you for an interview. Another benefit of this standardized interview offer date strategy is that applicants get time earlier in the interview season to strategize if they don't get that many interviews on that date, right? You're not like left waiting by the phone, waiting for a date to call. You'll know if you have gotten enough interviews by that time. And if you haven't, then you need to talk to your mentors about what should you do next. Do you want to apply to more programs? Do you want to apply to a different specialty? Do you want to withdraw for that year and see what else you could do the next year? There are many different things that you might consider, and having that information as early as possible in the interview season is only going to benefit you as the applicant. Maria, it would be nice if more specialties standardize. I anticipate that more programs will start doing this in the future. So the last thing I wanted to talk about as far as like timing goes is responding to interview offers. So there are some specialties that give you a 2 to 3 day window to respond to interview offers before that offer expires. I would strongly recommend that you respond as soon as possible once you get that invitation, because unfortunately, some programs don't guarantee that all invited applicants get an interview spot. So for example, if they are able to interview 100 applicants, they might send out 125 invitations. We know that some people tend to cancel, so it's kind of like overbooking a plane where, there might be more tickets sold than there are seats on the plane. Kind of the same idea, knowing that someone's probably not going to show up. You don't want to be that person, though, who gets stuck without a seat on the airplane. So you need to respond as soon as possible to every single interview offer that you get. There are a few specialties that do guarantee these interview spots will be available. So derm, emergency medicine, surgery, OB, and urology. That is not a majority of specialties, though. And there's only one specialty, at least this year, that caps the maximum number of interviews that any applicant can attend. And in ophtho, that is 15 per applicant. It's a total free-for-all in any other specialty, though. So someone can accept, like we said earlier, 40 interviews. Now, is that right? Is that a good use of their time and resources? Probably not. But, just keep in mind that you want to try to respond to every single interview offer as soon as possible. Okay. So let's talk about a few strategies for other parts of your application. And I know some folks had questions about these specific topics earlier today, so hopefully we will answer all of your questions. So U.S. clinical experience. All specialties that you apply to are going to want to see that you are committed and that you also have a good understanding of the practice in that field to which you're applying, right? Practice of medicine in the US, for better and for worse, is very different than the practice of medicine in many other parts of the world, right? So the vast majority of US programs are going to want to see clinical experience in the US. They want to see that you have had exposure to patients. They want you to have those communication and interpersonal skills. Again, expectations about communication in the US are different than they are in many other parts of the world. Another factor that the US experience is going to help you is it can help you network and get connection. So to the person earlier who asked, is it all about who you know? Well, it's not all about who you know, but who you know couldn't hurt. There are some of the highly competitive specialties that want to see some research in your application, specifically research in that particular specialty. But if you had to choose between one or the other, clinical experience versus research, I would recommend that you focus on the clinical experience. So unfortunately, at this time, there is no formal system for international physicians to apply for clinical experiences. Any clinical experiences that you are able to arrange, they're typically unpaid experiences that can last anywhere from 1 to a few months. And that time frame is going to kind of depend on the particular hospital or clinic where you might be doing your work. There are many students who choose to pay firms to help them secure U.S. clinical opportunities. And we're not going to get into details about which firms to use, not to use today. Just be aware that there are many that exist. So this experience, you want to complete it early enough that you will be able to get letters of recommendation from the physicians who saw you working directly with patients, okay? This needs to be submitted to ERAS well in advance. I would recommend that in the year you're applying, your letters should be ready no later than September 1st. Even if the deadline isn't until September 15th, you just want to make sure that you're going to have plenty of time and leave some room for error in case you need it. Now, where to do your clinical experience, it's kind of a fine balancing act because on the one hand, if you go to a very prestigious, well-known institution, that might look good on your resume, but it might not offer you the same networking opportunities with residency programs that are more international physician friendly. There are many prestigious, whatever that means, institutions that simply never accept international physicians. And so your time there is maybe not going to be as high value in terms of building some of those connections with folks in a program that is a more realistic place for you to expect to get interviews. So just a few final thoughts about the U.S. experience. Some opportunities may be a little vague about what your responsibilities are or where your experience will take place. I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions before you pay for anything or before you accept any opportunity. Ask what kind of setting you're going to be working in. Is it hospital? Is it clinic? Is it both? How much am I going to be working in each location? Will I get to interview and examine patients? This is a big one, right? This speaks to understanding the practice of medicine in that specialty in the United States. You should ask, how will you get feedback about your exam skills and your interview skills? And then finally, if you earn a letter of recommendation, would someone be able to write one for me? Someone who has worked directly with me and can speak to my specific skills and areas of strength. That's what you want to go into your letter of recommendation. So I have a little bit more, a few more thoughts about the letters of recommendation that I wanted to share with you. You will be submitting 3 or 4 letters of recommendation to each program. If a program says you should submit 4, do not submit 5, submit 4. You can upload more than 4 letters into ERAS, but you only send to each specific program as many letters as they have asked for. And who you want to write these letters, you want at least 1 letter from a US-based physician. This is really the main point, on paper at least, of doing those US clinical rotations so that you can have a physician from the United States write you a letter of recommendation. You should also have at least 1 letter of recommendation from someone in your specialty. So for example, pathology is sometimes used as a backup field by some people who are applying maybe to a more competitive specialty, and they say, pathology, that's easy. It's not easy, but they might think it's easy. If someone has submitted an application to my program and they don't have a pathology letter, a letter from a pathologist, that person is going to go much lower on my list of people that I want to interview, because how do I know that they actually know what it means to be a pathologist, right? Being a pathologist, practicing the field of medicine of pathology, it's not the same thing as what people see during their preclinical years in medical school. So the same thing applies to any other specialties. You need to demonstrate proof of your commitment to and your understanding of that field of medicine. Yeah, so internal medicine, I would say if it's a specialist writing a letter, so a cardiologist or a GI doctor, all of that would be perfectly fine for internal medicine, because those would be subspecialties inside of internal medicine, right? So that is perfectly fine and would be, a great direction for you if you have that opportunity. Okay, so what does a strong letter of recommendation look like? Now, this is mostly based on my own personal belief, but there's also information that you can find from the ACGME, which is the organization that accredits all residency programs in the US. So the author should be able to speak about their experience working directly with you, ideally in the setting of patient care. They should know how you act, how you treat patients, how you interact with patients, and be able to speak to that in your letter. It would be helpful for the letter writers to reference at least one of the skills that are listed here, because this is what are called the core competencies for residents. This is the list of skills that all residents are evaluated on during their residency. Now, what is expected from patient care for a pathologist is different from what's expected from patient care from an internal medicine resident, but all of the specific skills are categorized into one of these 6 competencies: patient care, medical knowledge, professionalism, interpersonal and communication skills, practice-based learning and improvement, and system-based practice. These are going to be high-value words to include because these words mean something to the program directors. Every resident is assessed against these competencies every rotation all throughout residency, right? So these are great buzzwords for your letter writers to include that will catch the attention of the program director. Okay, how many programs should I apply to? Well, we said earlier that the average international physician was submitting 139 applications last year. So there is some data, and this came from the Match Trends. So you should plan to submit at bare minimum 100 applications. So in 2021, other applicants, meaning not US seniors, of the applicants who matched, the middle 50% submitted between 75 and 200 applications, and the median was 102. The applicants who didn't match, the middle 50% submitted between 80 and 225 applications, right around 110 for the median. What this tells me is that people who didn't match submitted more applications, probably because they knew that they were not as strong applicants to begin with, right? Maybe they knew that they had one of those USMLE failures going into it, or, some other particular factor that made them believe they weren't as strong a candidate. So they ended up submitting more applications. However many programs you decide to apply to, you should plan to apply broadly to increase your chance of securing interviews. Because remember, the more interviews you have, the more programs you can rank. The longer your rank list, the higher your likelihood of matching. So it's all about getting as many interviews as you can secure. So unfortunately, this is a somewhat expensive process. And here are a summary of the fees that you can very easily find for ERAS. I just did a sample calculation. You can download this as an Excel file, and you can input your specific plans for how many specialties you're applying to, how many programs within that specialty, and the calculator will tell you what you can expect your final ERAS fee to be. Okay, so how many programs, once you have gone through your interviews, how many programs should you rank? Well, the average length of the rank list for any applicant has increased significantly, right? So if we said that the number of applications increased since 2007, similarly, the average length of the rank list has increased significantly. So in 2022, the average US IMG who matched had did I skip a page? Whoops. The average US IMG had 9.49 programs on their rank list. Unmatched applicants had 3.7, right? So unmatched applicants likely just did not secure as many interviews as folks who matched. For the non-US IMGs, it was a similar trend, 7.5 on average programs on the rank list for those who matched versus 3.5 programs on the rank list for those who did not match. So really, what you should remember is that you should rank every program that you interviewed in that you would attend. Rank every program, because every program on that rank list counts, and every program that you can add to your rank list is just going to increase your likelihood of matching. So one question that I get asked a lot is about letters of intent, which are sometimes referred to as love letters. Should you send letters of intent to your top programs? It is not required, and in fact, it's not expected that you email your top choice program telling them that they are your top choice. And in fact, most program directors are not going to change their rank list based on letters of intent. We have all been in the situation as program directors where we get a letter from somebody that says, you're my favorite, you're my number one, you're at the top of my rank list. They had been ranked in such a way that if they had been truthful in that, they would have come to our program and they matched somewhere else, right? So if you do choose to send a letter or letters to any program, be 100% truthful. Do not tell more than one program that they are your top choice. Just don't do it. We'll find out. There's not that many of us, right? If you have a specific question for a program, by all means, you should email the program director or the program coordinator. If a program invites you for a second look, that is absolutely fine, and you should consider going if you are able to do so, but you are not expected to write a letter of intent. And honestly, I would recommend that you just not write a letter of intent at all. Sending a thank you note after the interview, great. Letter of intent, probably skip it. Now, this goes in both directions. What if you receive a letter of intent from a program director? There are many program directors who send emails to their top applicants near the time when rank lists are due. Now, some programs will email those who are ranked to match. What does that mean? Well, if you have 5 spots that you're trying to fill, they might email their top 5 applicants on their rank list and say, you are ranked to match. That means that if those 5 applicants rank this program as their number 1, they will match there, right? But rank to match doesn't always mean that. Maybe the program knows that, well, they don't usually get their top 5 candidates. Maybe they have to go down to number 20 on their list before they actually match. So rank to match, it sounds pretty simple. It's actually not. There's no one universal definition of that. Some programs might email the top half of their rank list. You won't, and you can't, know the strategy of every program director at every program. So just like the programs are not going to likely change their rank list based on your letters, I would say that you should not make changes to your rank list based on emails from program directors because they're not official, they're not binding, and this is just going to set you up for disappointment. So you should create your rank list in order of your preference and just block out all the noise. Create your list from the heart, from what you know ultimately is going to be the right place for you. So just a quick word on the SOAP before we finish up today. So SOAP replaces a process that used to be called a long time ago the scramble. And this really streamlines the process whereby unmatched applicants and unfilled programs can come together. So eligible unmatched applicants use ERAS to apply to these unfilled positions. And then once the applications have been submitted, programs can offer interviews, create preference lists, and offer positions to applicants. There's multiple rounds that you can go through. I'm not going to belabor the point because I know that this is all still pretty far away from you, but applicants are eligible for SOAP if they registered for the match, are eligible to enter a graduate medical education program on July 1st, and if they were fully unmatched or partially unmatched, meaning if you only matched in a preliminary program, not an advanced program, you could go through the SOAP process for the advanced program. It goes in the other direction too. If you only matched in an advanced program and you didn't match in a preliminary program, you could go through the SOAP process for the preliminary year. You do not have to have submitted a rank list in order to be eligible. And the reason that I bring this up is that there are some numbers that could be a little bit misleading for you. Ultimately, by the end of SOAP, 99.6% of all positions from the 2022 match were filled, and international students or physicians accounted for 22.4% of the positions filled during SOAP. So these are the numbers that might look a little scary to you at first glance, but I don't want you to be discouraged. This does not necessarily tell the whole story. So in 2022, if 9.8% of eligible applicants accepted a position through SOAP and 3.2% of non-US IMGs accepted a position through SOAP, well, not all eligible applicants chose to go through SOAP, right? Just because they were eligible for it does not obligate them to submit an application. So in reality, it's probably higher than 3.2% and 9.8% of international graduates who are able to accept positions. But this is unfortunately the best data that we have to work with. All right. So just a few take-home points that I hope you will all remember. The most important factors in getting interviews and matching are in your control. Pass step 1 the first time you take it. Get a high step 2 CK score. And during your interviews, you want to be at your best. You want your interactions with faculty and residents to be gold star, chef's kiss, super professional, super friendly, super positive. All of that is going to increase your likelihood of being ranked and ultimately of matching there. The more interviews you can secure, the longer rank list you will have, and the higher likelihood you will have of matching. You should plan to submit at least 100 applications, and you should rank every program where you interviewed that you would attend. I would strongly encourage you to submit a supplemental application, even though it's optional, because program signals and geographic preferences can significantly increase your likelihood of getting interview offers in the programs that you are most interested in. And then finally, clinical experience in the US and letters of recommendation from US physicians are highly desirable and should be a very high priority on your list of things to do other than preparing for the USMLE exams. So with that, I am happy to take any questions in our last couple of minutes. I can hang out for a few minutes after 20 past. Thank you all again for attending today. I hope you learned something, and I wish you all the very, very best of luck in your USMLE prep and in your applications. Okay, so plastic surgery. Do I think plastic surgery is a realistic goal? I would encourage you to go into the Charting the Match Outcomes document, and that will give you a lot more detailed information specifically about plastic surgery. Could we have my email so we can discuss further? That is fine. I thought I had my email on the very beginning. You're so welcome. I see a question, does being a U.S. permanent resident make a difference? So if you do not require a visa sponsor from the program, that can be a favorable factor in your application. So if you're a permanent resident, that can potentially be helpful. Now, that being said, there are many, many programs that do sponsor visas. So just because you're not a permanent resident does not mean that, you know, all chances are lost. Let me, I can only do one thing at a time. So let me put my email for you. You are very welcome. Can we contact programs that we are interested in before we give the STEP exam? Mukta, if you are trying to secure a US experience, a rotation, I think it's very reasonable to try to contact programs that you're interested in, but I would not specifically solicit them and say that you're interested in applying there necessarily if you haven't taken all of your exams yet. But if you have taken your exams, you know, that's going to be helpful for you to secure some of these experiences. So Nee's question, how in a specialty that does not have that many programs, for instance, in Virginia, they only have 6 programs, and it's also similar. Yeah, I mean, so Nee, you should definitely submit more than just 6 applications for sure. And I would encourage you, even if you know in your heart that you really only want to be in one particular state, I would still apply to other programs and interview at other programs, because that's going to give you practice interviewing, right? And that's going to make you look even better on those interview days once you get to those programs that you are super, super interested in. So if you stay within, you know, a general region, programs don't know where else you've applied. They don't care where else you've applied, really, right? So I would apply, you know, to as many programs as you could plausibly imagine yourself attending. How many programs do not participate in the match? I don't have a number, but the vast, vast, vast majority of programs are participating in the match, and you should plan to submit your application and likely secure a position through the match. Is age a factor? Yash, that's a good question. I would say age is not a factor, but the more recently that you have graduated from medical school, that is potentially going to be a favorable part of your application. If you're someone who graduated 25 years ago, you know, it might be a little tougher to adjust back into a training setting. Now, if you have been practicing in that area of medicine, then clearly I think you can build a very strong case for yourself. But age specifically is not going to be a factor. So the value of research, publications versus experience but not published, I think having some publications is great, but I would not value getting publications over clinical experience. That being said, sometimes when you are doing your clinical experience, you might get connected to a physician who is conducting research, and you might just naturally out of that clinical experience also get connected into some kind of opportunity for publication. That person, if you're working closely with them, could write you a letter of recommendation as well. So I would say having at least some research, at least some publications is nice. I would say, and just like we saw on the program director's survey, that's not the most important factor on your application. It's not even in the top 5, actually. So Rishab, for non-US IMGs, the main goal is to get a really high score to guarantee at least one program. I can't make any guarantees. Nobody can make any guarantees, but the higher your step 2 score, if you have passed step 1 on the first try, you passed step 2 on the first try, and you have a really high step 2 and step 3 score, that's going to look really good. And those are some very, very important features. Remember that we saw the program directors ranked highly when deciding who to interview. So a gap year, is it okay that there's 1 to 2 years studying for the steps? I think that's, nobody expects that someone can study for all 3 USMLE exams in 1 year. I can't imagine anybody would penalize an applicant for taking a year or 2 to prepare for and take all of the exams. Now, if it took you 10 years, that might raise some eyebrows, but 1 to 2 years, I would not consider that detrimental. As long as you can explain what you've been doing, you've been preparing for USMLE. That's what you've been doing. Okay, how many rotations do you need to apply for the match? Melissa, there is not a specific number that is required, but the more clinical rotations in the US that you can do, the higher likelihood that you'll be able to get at least 1 letter from a US physician. And again, that is one of the very, very important factors that program directors consider other than your scores, right? So US physician letters are very valuable, and you should try to get at least 1 of those. All right, can you do residency on H4? Moksha, unfortunately, I don't have that specific level of detailed information on visa sponsorship, and I would encourage you to search, a little bit more broadly. I wonder if maybe one of the TAs might be able to contribute any suggestions for where to find details about visa sponsorship options. So how are gaps best handled in an interview for reasons like COVID? I would be honest, right? If you had absolutely no ability to travel anywhere because of travel restrictions due to COVID, we get it, right? Like the whole world had that happen. And if that is the explanation, right? Be honest, be transparent. That is always the best advice, is to be honest with whatever your situation is. So can you repeat how to shorten the average for IMG percent in Frida Web? So the example is going to be, Maria, on one of the slides from earlier in the presentation. There's little like draggy bars, and percent IMG is one of the parameters that you can use to look at for each program. How many years from years of graduation is considered okay? Nisha, again, I don't think there's one specific answer. I think 25 years, like I said before, certainly that is an exaggeration to some extent, but not unheard of. That's going to be a lot. I think the sooner you can apply after graduating, or if you have been doing training or if you've been practicing in that area, I don't think that's going to count against you per se. Do I think non-US IMGs need more research activities while still in medical school so that their rate of match will be higher? Well, like I said, the number of research activities is not as high on the priority list for program directors as the USMLE exams, letters of recommendation, and personal statement. So if you're trying to prioritize how to best spend your time, for me, I would not say that research is the most important thing that you should be doing. I would say there are better uses of your time. Which one is better, an externship or an elective? I don't think it really matters what the clinical experience is called, as long as you are working directly with patients, you are working with a physician who is providing care to patients. That's all that matters, right? You can call it whatever you want. You can call it a birthday party. But at the end of the day, if you were talking to a physician, working with a physician, seeing patients with another physician, that's really what the most important piece is. Some high points during the interview, Vola, that is a whole other separate presentation. I think the most important thing is be polite, be on time, be humble, and smile. All right, I have 4 more minutes before we turn into pumpkins. Is applying to residency within 7 to 8 years of graduating okay? Shreya, like I said earlier, I think the sooner you can apply after graduating, that will likely be beneficial to you. There's no magic number. There's no specific number of years that I or anyone could really give you. The longer you've been out of training, out of medical school, you might need to have a stronger application in terms of scores, in terms of, phenomenal letters, in terms of a really, really strong personal statement. But there's no magic cutoff necessarily. All right, is it better to take the test during MD4 step 1 and 2 or wait till graduation? Maria, I would say take it whenever you feel like you are best prepared. There are certain timelines that I'm not going to get into as far as how soon after or how long after you take your exams that you can apply. Google that information. But you should take it when you feel like you are best ready to pass for step 1 and to get a high score for step 2. All right, is a plan to match into surgery an unfruitful saga? Given the low rates of match for IMGs, I would not say anything is unfruitful, but if your goals are to get into a specialty where IMGs have a lower match rate, then you need to really look at what the program directors value in that particular specialty. And you need to do everything you can to get experience working with US physicians, to get a letter or letters from US physicians in those specialties, have a really strong personal statement about why you are the one person, you're the right exact person. It's a low success rate, but you're the person who's going to succeed, right? Like you have to convince programs why you are so special and why you're the right choice. From what I know, are virtual interviews something that's going to continue? Yes, programs have all been recommended to continue virtual interviewing this year. Going forward, personally, I think virtual interviews are fantastic. And I, myself, don't think that we should go back to in-person. I think that we should continue doing virtual interviews, but I am not the queen of the world. I don't make the rules. So I think you just have to pay attention each year and the year that you're applying, kind of know what the expectation is. Can you get a rotation from a doctor who you know personally in the US? Absolutely. As long as you are working with a doctor and that person has, arrangements with the healthcare facility or hospital where they're working, where you are permitted to be working with them. Sure, if you know someone personally, great, try to set it up. That sounds great. It is best to keep your student status while taking the tests, then take the test after graduating. I don't know that that is true. I don't know about keeping your student status. I think the date of graduation, applying more recently after you've graduated is great, but certainly not mandatory. Okay, Kaplan does give a visa if you are preparing in the New York Center. That is correct. Are publications from outside the US taken into consideration, or as with clinical experience, are English preferred? I would say any experience that you have in the US is going to be preferred over experience outside the US. That being said, we don't expect everything on your application to have taken place in the US. You are not from the US in many cases, and it's simply impossible to expect that every single thing on your application is from the US. Where can you find timelines? Maria, if you go onto the ERAS website, you should be able to find all of the timelines that you need. You could also Google. All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you all so much. These are wonderful questions. I've really enjoyed my time with you. Best of luck. Take care and enjoy your weekends. Bye.